My father-in-law secretly took my baby's DNA for a paternity test because he thought I cheated. When I discovered the results, hidden in his house, my husband and I cut him out of our lives. So, my husband Jake and I have been together for like 6 years now, and we've been hitched for 3 of those. But here's the thing. His dad, Robert, has never really been my biggest fan. I think it's because I don't exactly fit the mold of what he imagined for his son. Jake's family is super traditional, like the women are all about being quiet and going along with whatever. His mom barely ever speaks up, just nods and smiles. His sister's the same with her husband. Then there's me. I'm all about working. I'm outgoing. I've got my own thoughts, and I'm not shy about sharing them. Over the years, Robert's made these snide little comments about how I'm too independent or too focused on my career. I remember when Jake and I got engaged, Robert had this private chat with Jake, asking if he was sure he wanted to marry someone who might not be the proper wife and mom type. Jake told me, and we both had a good laugh about it, because seriously, it was ridiculous. Looking back, though, it should have been a bigger red flag. It's not like Robert is outright mean, it's more of a passive-aggressive vibe. He'll say stuff that sounds innocent but has a bit of a sting. Like when I got promoted last year, he was all, "Oh, it's nice some women can have it all these days," but then adds how he hopes I don't get too wrapped up in my career to remember what's really important. And when I'd cook for family get-togethers, he'd always find something to critique, like the seasoning wasn't right, or there weren't enough sides, or he'd wonder why I didn't make his favorite dish. Jake always stood up for me, which was cool, but he'd also try to smooth things over instead of calling out his dad directly. He'd excuse his dad's behavior as being old-fashioned or just thoughtless. Things got a bit dicey when we started trying to have kids. It took us about 1.5 years before I got pregnant with Emma. During that time, Robert threw in his 2 cents about how maybe if I wasn't so stressed over work, I'd get pregnant easier. He even suggested I quit my job to focus on being a wife, because, that's what worked back in his day. I mostly brushed it off, but it was really annoying. Once I finally got pregnant, Robert's attitude switched up in this bizarre way. He turned super interested in the pregnancy, asking lots of personal questions about my doctor visits, when exactly I got pregnant, and if I was taking care of myself. At first, I thought he was just excited to be a grandpa, but there was something weird about it. He'd make these comments about genetics and how the baby better look like Jake. As my pregnancy went on, he got even more into it, talking about how genetics don't lie and stuff. I had to travel a bit for work while pregnant, just quick overnight trips, nothing major. But Robert seemed overly curious about these trips, asking who I was meeting and where I was staying. Jake thought his dad was just worried about me traveling, but it felt like there was more to it. Emma was born 8 months ago, and she's perfect. She's got Jake's dark hair and nose, but my lighter eyes and maybe my face shape. She looks like a great mix of us both, just what you'd expect. But since she was born, Robert's been acting odd about how she looks, always commenting on how much babies change, and how you can't really tell who they look like when they're so little. During those first months, Robert was around a lot, bringing gifts and visiting Emma. He'd hold her, but always seemed to study her face, like he was looking for something. Jake and I were exhausted new parents, and didn't think much of Robert's weirdness at first. We were just trying to get through the fog of parenting a newborn. But looking back, Robert's behavior was definitely strange. About 4 months ago, Robert started offering to babysit more often. At first, it was a relief because we needed the help, and he seemed to really enjoy his time with Emma. She was comfortable with him, so we thought, why not? But then weird things started happening. Sometimes when we'd get back home, Emma would be in different clothes than when we left. Robert would say she had a diaper blowout or spit up, which was fair enough, but it was happening more often than it ever did with us. Once, I came home early from the store, and Robert looked totally caught off guard to see me. He was in the kitchen with Emma and just seemed guilty about something, although I couldn't put my finger on what. Then there were these little things, like Emma's stuff being moved around, her hairbrush in the living room instead of the nursery, or her blanket folded differently. Jake thought I was overthinking it when I mentioned it to him, saying Robert was probably just being helpful or forgetful. Robert also started asking about Emmy, as health and development, but in a weirdly detailed way, not your typical grandparent questions. He wanted to know about any medical tests, blood work, and what her doctor said about her growth. When I asked why he cared so much, he'd just say he was curious or wanted to make sure she was healthy. What really got me uneasy were his comments about Emma's paternity, which he made as if joking but clearly weren't funny. He'd say stuff about how she's a mystery baby or wonder who she really takes after. Once, he even mentioned how modern technology could answer so many questions about babies, and when Jake asked what he meant, Robert just laughed it off. I tried talking to Jake about how uncomfortable all this made me, but he kept defending his dad, saying Robert was just getting used to being a grandpa and maybe didn't know how to show his excitement. Jake pointed out that Robert didn't have much experience with babies since he had kids late compared to his friends. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my gut more. I was a tired new mom and figured maybe I was just being oversensitive because of my past issues with Robert. I didn't want to stir up drama in Jake's family over what could be simple misunderstandings, but then something happened that really pushed me to share my story. So not too long ago, Jake was out of town for work, and I was juggling everything at home with Emma. I was feeling super stressed and tired, so when Robert offered to babysit Emma for a bit so I could get some rest, I jumped at the chance. My plan was simply to catch a nap and maybe tidy up while Emma was with him. Robert showed up around noon, and I handed Emma to him right after she had her lunch and was all happy. I told him I'd be upstairs if he needed anything and to just holler. He assured me they'd be good, so I went upstairs and totally crashed, like deep sleep kind of crashed. When I woke up, it was nearly 5 p.m., so I'd been out for about 4 hours. I felt a bit guilty for sleeping that long, but man, did I feel refreshed. I expected to find Robert and Emma in the living room, but the house was eerily quiet. I called out for Robert, and he replied from the kitchen. I found him there with Emma on his lap, and she was unusually fussy, reaching for me and making these upset noises, which wasn't typical for her with Robert. The weird part was, Robert seemed really jittery when I walked in. He started rambling about how Emma was great all afternoon, but had just gotten a bit cranky because she needed her mom. He quickly handed her to me and began gathering his stuff like he was in a rush to leave. That's when I noticed Emma's hair looked different. It's hard to explain, but it seemed like someone tried to style it, which I never do because she's a baby and doesn't need it. When I mentioned it, Robert said he'd been playing with her hair. Here's the kicker. Emma's clothes were different too. I dressed her in this cute yellow dress that morning, one my mom gave her, and it's one of my favorites. But when Robert handed her back, she was in a plain white onesie I didn't recognize. When I asked Ade about the change, he got defensive, saying she spit up on the dress, and he put her in something clean from her dresser. But Emma rarely spits up, and when she does, it's never enough for a full outfit change. Plus, I know all her clothes, and that onesie was new to me. I asked where the yellow dress was so I could wash it, and he said it was in the laundry hamper upstairs. But later, I checked, and it wasn't there. I looked everywhere, and it just vanished. This whole thing left me feeling uneasy. Robert usually hangs around to chat after babysitting, but he left pretty quickly that day, which was odd. Emma also seemed unusually clingy the rest of the afternoon, like something had upset her. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just overreacting from being stressed and exhausted. That night, when Jake called, I told him about the strange day with his dad. He thought I was just being paranoid, suggesting that Robert was probably just trying to help clean up Emma, and I was reading into it too much. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. So, I started paying more attention to Robert's behavior. I began to notice a pattern. All the times Emma's clothes were changed after Robert babysat, his odd questions about her medical info, and weird comments about her looks. It dawned on me that maybe Robert was suspicious about Emma's paternity and was trying to prove something. This made me feel sick, thinking my father-in-law might actually suspect I'd been unfaithful. I decided to get to the bottom of it. Robert and Jake's mom were going away the next weekend, so their house would be empty. I knew where they kept important documents, and if there was a paternity test, it would probably be in Robert's office. I know this sounds crazy, and I'm not proud of it, but I was desperate for answers. I used Jake's mom's spare key to get into their house while they were gone. I felt awful about sneaking in, but I had to know the truth. I headed straight to Robert's office and started digging through his desk and filing cabinets, not sure what I'd find, but hoping I'd recognize it when I did. That's when I found it, a manila envelope with Emma's name on it in Robert's handwriting. Inside was a paternity test report from a lab I didn't know, dated about 6 weeks ago, around the time Robert had been babysitting Emma more often. The report showed a 99.97% probability that Jake was Emma's dad. I just sat there, stunned. My father-in-law had actually taken samples from my daughter and husband to secretly test if Jake was Emma's father. His suspicions about my fidelity were intense enough to go through with a test, but even after finding out he was wrong, he never said a word and kept treating me with suspicion. I took pictures of the report and put everything back, then left their house feeling completely numb. I couldn't believe my father-in-law had done something so invasive. When Jake returned from his trip, I showed him the pictures. At first, he couldn't believe it, thinking, there must be another explanation because his dad would never do something like that. But the proof was right there. Jake was quiet for a long time, trying to comprehend his dad's hurtful actions. Finally, he decided he needed to talk to his dad directly to get an explanation. So, here's the deal with the whole paternity test situation. Jake's dad, Robert, tried to brush it off at first, but when Jake showed him the test results, Robert had to fess up. Robert said he was just worried about Jake getting hurt. He mentioned that some things I did during my pregnancy made him suspicious, and he thought he was protecting Jake from raising another guy's kid. Apparently, he was planning to fill Jake in on the test results eventually. But first, he needed to figure out how to handle it. When Jake asked Robert what made him so suspicious, Robert pointed out that I traveled a lot for work while I was pregnant and was secretive about my plans. He also mentioned that when Emma was born, she didn't look much like Jake, which amped up his doubts. Even after the results proved him wrong, Robert didn't apologize. He was just happy the test showed Emma was Jake's daughter. Jake came home from talking to his dad, super upset. He had never seen his dad act so paranoid and invasive before. Jake was hurt that Robert never talked to him about these concerns and just assumed I was cheating. We spent hours discussing what to do next. Jake was torn between being mad at his dad and wanting to fix things with his family. Meanwhile, I was livid. The thought of Robert secretly taking samples from Emma without our knowledge freaked me out. What if Emma got hurt or scared? The more I thought about it, the more I felt that even after the test cleared everything up, Robert kept treating me with suspicion. If he truly cared about protecting Jake, wouldn't he have been relieved once he knew the truth? Instead, he hid the evidence and carried on like I was guilty. So Jake and I decided we had to cut contact with Robert, at least for now. What he did was a massive breach of trust and privacy. Jake called his dad and told him that we wouldn't be bringing Emma around anymore and needed some space. Robert got all defensive, claiming any good father would have done the same to protect his family. Jake told him that no matter his intentions, what he did was wrong, and we couldn't trust him with Emma anymore. Robert got angry, saying we were overreacting since the test proved Emma was Jake's daughter, so things should be fine now. But that just reinforced our decision that Robert didn't get how problematic his actions were. Then Jake's mom called, trying to smooth things over, saying Robert made a mistake but loves Emma and wanted to ensure she was really part of the family. She tried to guilt-trip us into reconsidering by saying Emma would miss out on having her grandpa in her life. After we told Robert we were stepping back, it was quiet for a day until Jake's sister Lisa called to see what was happening since their parents were upset. Jake explained it to her, and she wasn't surprised at all. She admitted she had her own doubts about Emma's paternity too, because Emma's ma didn't look much like Jake to her either. She brought up the same stuff about my work trips and being on my phone a lot around family. Jake was hurt that his sister had suspicions, but never spoke to him about it. Lisa said she didn't want to cause a fuss over what might just be paranoia, but she got why their dad wanted to know for sure. This made me realize it wasn't just Robert who had doubts. Others in Jake's family did too, which felt like everyone was judging me. Lisa was glad the test showed Emma was Jake's daughter and hoped we could move past it, but she thought we were being too hard on Robert, who was just trying to protect Jake. Jake started to question if we were overreacting, thinking that if multiple people had doubts, maybe Robert's actions were a bit more understandable. He thought maybe Robert just handled it wrong, but his intentions were good. I got frustrated, reminding Jake that regardless of intentions, what Robert did was a huge violation. But Jake suggested maybe we could try to rebuild trust with him instead of just cutting him off. That led to a big fight between us, where Jake said I was unforgiving and holding grudges, and I accused him of caring more about his family's feelings than protecting our daughter. It wasn't pretty. The next day, Jake's mom called me to diffuse things, saying Robert felt awful and learned his lesson, asking if we'd try family counseling to work it out. She insisted that Robert never meant harm, and was devastated about being kept from Emma. I told her I needed time to process all this, and wasn't ready to consider counseling because I was still too upset. But Jake's mom wouldn't let it go, saying Emma needs her grandpa and this whole thing was hurting everyone. She made me question if I was being selfish, wondering if I was overreacting. The test did clear things up, and Robert is Emma's grandfather. Should I try to put this behind me for family peace? Now I'm seriously confused about what to do. Jake is leaning towards reconciling, especially after his sister's reaction made Robert's concerns seem more reasonable than I initially thought. Am I being too harsh here? So I was really stuck on whether I was being too stubborn about this whole situation. Jake's mom thought maybe I should look into counseling or mediation, but I didn't want to be the one to mess up Jake's family. Still, I couldn't just brush off what Robert did. Then, everyone started telling me I was blowing things out of proportion, and Jake was getting super frustrated because I didn't want to reconcile with his dad. It made me question if I was being overly harsh. So, I thought maybe if I knew more about what Robert had done, I could try to move past it. I wanted to know how Robert got involved with Emma and Jake's samples and what the process was like for the paternity test. Jake was on board and asked his dad to explain it all, hoping it'd somehow make Robert's actions seem less creepy. Jake went to his parents' house and asked his dad for the lowdown, only to find out it was worse than I thought. Turns out, Robert had been planning this for ages. He found a testing company that was okay with hair samples since he figured that was easier to snag without anyone knowing. Over a few babysitting sessions, Robert started pulling hairs from Emma while she was asleep or distracted. He lost some hairs, so it took multiple tries. Robert also collected Jake's hair from his old room whenever we came over for dinner. But here's what really freaked me out. Robert admitted that he gave Emma some liquid Benadryl to make her sleepy so she wouldn't fuss while he got more hair. He straight up drugged my baby without my knowing. Hearing this made me lose it. I cried uncontrollably. The thought of Robert giving medicine to my 8-month-old daughter without telling me was horrifying. What if she had an allergic reaction? What if he gave her too much? What if something went wrong while I napped upstairs? Jake was just as shaken. He never imagined his dad would do something so reckless and dangerous. Medicating someone else's child without permission is a huge no-no. We called Emma's doctor, who was equally horrified when we explained. The doc said giving Benadryl to an infant without medical oversight and parental consent was crazy dangerous and potentially illegal since infants can react unpredictably to antihistamines. That's when it hit me. This was way worse than a privacy breach. Robert put Emma's health at risk. I contacted the police to explore our options, and an officer mentioned that giving meds without consent could be child endangerment or assault. We could file a report to push legal action. Jake felt torn about involving law enforcement. He got why I was upset, but was worried about his dad getting busted. He asked if we could settle it as a family, but I pointed out that Robert might have committed serious crimes. Unauthorized medical testing and secret drugging could be seen as child abuse. We decided to confront Robert about the Benadryl before picking the next steps. Jake called him over so we could talk. When Robert arrived, he was defensive right off the bat. He tried to justify giving Emma a tiny amount to make her sleepy. I asked if he realized how risky it was to medicate without asking us. He said he researched the dose online and was super careful, but that made me angrier. Robert had no medical training and no business making decisions about medicating Emma. When I called it abuse and said we might report him, Robert flipped, insisting he meant no harm. But Jake backed me, telling his dad it was unacceptable to endanger Emma's safety. Robert argued he was just trying to protect Jake from raising someone else's kid, saying we should appreciate his efforts to find the truth. The convo ended with Robert storming out, claiming we were ungrateful and dramatic. After he left, Jake and I talked it over. Jake was torn, not recognizing this side of his dad and worrying about what else he might do. We decided to file a police report, even if nothing happens legally, to have an official record. We also got a restraining order to keep Robert away from Emma, as the pediatrician suggested. Later on, Jake's mom called, crying and begging us not to bring the police into it. She said Robert was just trying to be a good dad and grandpa. But I don't see how drugging a baby is just a misunderstanding. Robert made a deliberate choice that could have hurt Emma. That's not something I can just forgive or forget. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more crazy real-life stories happening around you.